I always felt like I was really forcing everything I did in the ministry. It felt really forced. And in 2012, a number of years after I got out of the ministry, I was on the phone with my dad and I said to my dad, I said, "Dad, I just feel like a fraud." And he said, "Well, what have you done wrong?" And I said, "I haven't done anything wrong. I just don't feel that I'm fitting within that. Like it's just not happening and working."
Hello, everybody. Mike Donahue here with Brian May and Groomed.Connect. We have a special guest today. His name is Bracy Wilson. Say hi, Bracy.
Hey, what's up?
I'm going to let him introduce himself in just a minute. But before we get into that, I want to say Happy New Year to all of you guys. And we're glad that you are on the podcast today. Sorry, I was gone last week. My brother was in town from Boston, Massachusetts. We had a good time. He hung out for a week. And so we just kind of got caught up. Brian, thank you for that podcast. You and your wife did an amazing job. It was fun editing that because I took notes. Where's my notes? Right here. I took notes. I was like, that's really good stuff. I mean, I know
Yeah.
it's all Cheryl. I know it's not
Yeah, I
you.
was
So.
gonna say, I'm not taking any credit for that for sure. She's the brain to the outfit, so
Yeah, she did a really good job. She puts up with you. She's a saint.
she does.
Yeah, so yeah, it was good. You guys did a really good job. Your dog was barking, but we were able to edit that out. So that was good. All right. So getting into this week, starting the new year, I reconnected with an old pal. It's kind of funny, ironic. It's kind of weird the way this is going. This podcast has been going on for about a year and a half, and we have these situations where, we just kind of put our stuff out there and people hear about it, things connect. And Bracy actually saw that if I get this right, Bracy, I think you saw that I was friends with Ron Blumenkemper on Facebook, and you're like, wait, Mike knows him? Okay. And then you called me or you connected through Facebook, and then we ended up getting on a phone call. And I know your family. I know your brothers. I know Scott probably more than Brad, but I know, your church situation and you're connected down in Texas. So why don't you just kind of unpack who you are and what you're about and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, this is definitely, doing something I haven't done in a while. I haven't been talking in this spot or publicly for a long while. It's been 15 years. I'm a third generation Pentecostal, my mom and my dad's side, all from the Dallas Fort Worth area, Metroplex. And more than anything, that just tells you how much of an ass I am. And so, somebody said, if, uh, if someone tells you, if three people tell you're an ass, get a saddle. And so I've had my saddle for a while and still ride it every now and then. And so I grew up in the ministry. I had, kind of that same kind of story of growing up in church and I started, but my thing was is I started preaching when I was 12. And I'm not saying that was, really the best for me or not, but it looks like my son's coming in on me. This is my son, Bryce, and guys, this is just the way it is around my house. So my wife is to be helping me, but this is my 22-year-old son, Bryce. You want to say hello real quick? And then will you go hang out with mom? Can you bend down and say hello? Okay, go hang out with mom. Okay, there you go. See you later. So I grew up in ministry, started preaching when I was 12. I was in a Christian school. I started traveling when I was 16. That's really the only job I had. I put myself through Bible college by traveling as an itinerant minister. And so, that's kind of the way my life started out. I had three brothers. My dad was in full-time ministry, and that's all I knew. That was the bubble, the life that I lived in.
Wow. Wow. So you kind of had your life planned out. It was like you were going to do this. This is what you knew since you were a little kid.
Yeah, I mean, I think we used to say eat, drink, and sleep. right? This is what we do. We eat, drink, and sleep. They may not have ever said that we're in the business of ministry, but that was the business we were in. And it was everything, right? If I had an athletic practice at school, but I had church stuff going on, well, I would just leave in the middle of practice. And that's just the way the life was, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, small group, that was our life, and it was safe, right? It was mostly.
Yeah. So in that world, there were heroes, right? There were people that your dad brought in, your brother got to know that Jeannie Mayo was probably one of them, where they were people that you emulated and you wanted to be like, and I mean, let's face it, they do put some pretty good people around good speakers, good communicators, funny people. I mean, I have a list in my head of people that I was exposed to that were heroes of mine, and you kind of emulate, you want to be like them. Was that part of your reality?
Yeah, I mean, I'm embarrassed to say that I don't know why someone didn't slap the shit out of me and say, "What the hell were you thinking?" But I had this dream. My dream was to speak at General Council of the Assemblies of God. And I'm embarrassed by that. And
Now,
you say, "Well, what's wrong with that?" There's a lot of stuff wrong with that. And the thing that's wrong with it is that there's more than that in life.
Right.
And it's so embarrassing to even say that I would have to look back and say, why did someone not slap me and say, Bracy, that's a great dream. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, there's other things in the world and there's other things going on in the world besides the Assemblies of God, the end times, and rapture films.
Yeah. Yeah. When you say that, it makes me think about how ingrained you use the term, and I really like it, the business of ministry, because that really would be the pinnacle of that vein, right? The business of ministry, you get to go speak in front of the grand poobah and everything. That doesn't speak so much to the ministry of ministry. It speaks to the business of ministry, right?
It sure does. And some things I'm really speechless about because I think being reared in a leadership teaching mindset culture, John Maxwell, servant leadership, and you got to give, and you have this concept of what ministry is. And so I don't want to, be so critical of that I don't bring solutions. But I don't necessarily know that we're in a solution oriented time in the church right now. Some people may think that, and their thinking is we have a problem. The problem is that more people aren't in church, or the problem is that, not enough people are going to heaven, or not enough people discipled. And for people that in the circle that I grew up in, if when they hear me say that, they may have already turned off this podcast by now. Because and the thing is now that I'm on the outside of it, where I haven't been going to church for a long time, and a lot of it had to do with, and not to get too into it, but I left after I left full-time ministry. My son on the spectrum of autism did not want to stay in the overflow, let alone children's church or in the hallway. And so that's fine. And it took us a long time to get over that shame and that guilt and that ingrained going to church every week. And you get me talking, I'll forget where I was. But I'm just kind of just sharing, and I don't remember where I was on that.
but
But
yeah, so you got out of it because you
yeah, so when I look back inside of it, from the church world and the inside, we're looking to solve problems. Why are people turned off? Should it be seeker friendly or should it be more traditional? Are people sick of the smoke and mirrors and the lights and they've got to go to more liturgy and they want to go in the confession booth? They want something more, real. Which one is it? And, they're leaving this type of church and they're leaving this type of church. And everybody's having that conversation with themselves. It's an incestual conversation.
Right.
okay,
And
hold
I
on. You say
really,
ancestral. What do you mean?
Well, it's an ancestral conversation is that if you're all talking to each other and you're all saying the same thing, fill in the blank. One dumbass is talking to another dumbass. It's the blind leading the blind. And some people may say, well, you're bitter, you're angry, and I'll bring my point home and we can continue. But you're bitter, you're angry. And I would say, okay, I'll give you that. But I'll also say that what's happened in the last 3 months has been an imperfect example of what people like me that have taken a step away to look at the forest and not just get lost in the trees, but to look at the forest on the outside of what they were in. And Erica Kirk and her holy weird Kenneth Copeland eyes. I'm sorry, but from the outside, it looks like a freak show. It looks weird, okay? I don't know what happened. There's lots of questions and it's interesting to think about it and to talk about it and to watch podcast shows. But for the extreme, from the general critique of everything from the outside looking in, that's what people are seeing. And it's weird.
And I think it's interesting. You really pointed out they're trying to solve the problem, but they're not trying to solve the right problems, right? They're trying to solve the problems that we don't have enough butts and seats. Let's face it, this, it's follow the money. We don't have enough cash flowing in. This thing is threatening our reputation. We need to remove that threat. They're not looking at, okay, what are the root causes of this? What are the things that are really important? What are we supposed to be doing? Rather than protecting ourselves, how do we posture ourselves so that we really go deep and examine what the fundamental root issues are? I don't see a lot of that happening in the church. And frankly, we spent probably 35 years in the church that Sam and Jeannie were running and then passed on. I wasn't seeing any of that. I was seeing exactly what you're saying. So with respect to my little bubble of the world, I would say that's been going on for decades.
So, and Bracy, so you are familiar with the Daniel Savala situation down the Chi Alpha. Can you unpack that a little bit from your perspective?
Sure. So the Daniel Savala thing happened in the 90s, or, if you go back and in XA Lion's Den, XA stands for Chi Alpha. That's a great forum to go to, and Ron Bloomingkemper has done a fantastic job. NBC has really, put it on the map and put a pin on it. And I think there's been a lot more spotlight on this scandal, on this horrific, hair on fire scandal. Um, this had come out in 2023. And because I'm not really been in the loop pretty much at all, I didn't catch it until February of 2024 when I started reading. It actually had another friend of mine I grew up with that also has stepped away. He pointed it out to me and I started reading. And I was actually on a 3-day vacation with my family, and my wife's driving and I'm reading and I'm listening to Anthony Scoma, who I've known for, I guess, 20 years. And so I know Anthony. I know what kind of guy he is. I know when he says he did something, Anthony did it. If Anthony said he said it, well, he said it. And then I know the kind of people he's talking to because I've had interactions with them growing up with them over the years. I'm amazed about how many characters or how many people and families that my parents and people I went to college with that are on the fringe of this or somehow didn't catch it, which is an interesting story within itself. But you got this guy, Daniel, who abuses multiple kids, multiple accusations. He gets arrested in Alaska. They go to court. He spends 90 days in jail, and he decides to plead guilty and register. They've got him on video confessing how he's doing it, how he did it, how he used, leaders to coerce kids and groom them to come in. And they weren't just doing one-on-one. They were having group session. They're having a little small group. And what's interesting is one or two of those leaders, at least one of those leaders was allegedly in that group in those early years and then ended up in Texas and helped bring him in. And maybe a lot of people still know this, but I would think that most people know about this that is in the circle, but that's not true, because I'm looking at the forum and I'm talking to Ron and I'm talking to other guys involved. And there's actual pastors and people that still don't know about this that are in these Assemblies of God districts, South Texas and North Texas, and are just now learning more about it, which I don't know how that happened, except leadership didn't inform them very well. And so you've got guys that back in '89 were going to youth camp together, youth pastors. We could call out names. They're all over the website. I just don't understand how in the '90s we knew this guy was this guy. We knew this guy was bad. In the early 2000s when, we knew this guy was bad. And then in the teens when people started, 19 times the Assemblies of God was documented and being called, emailed. I mean, the documentation that Ron's come up with, when I saw this 2 years ago and, I was like, this is going to be a Netflix thing. I mean, they're just waiting for the trials, and the trials are, happening. They're opening up now. I mean, they're on the docket. In fact, between the general counsel and the South Texas district, they have been penalized, I guess is the legal word, $183,000 over the last 12 months for delaying and getting around not turning in the evidence and turning in documentation to the court on time. Can you imagine that conversation? Think about that conversation and who's in that meeting. You've got the attorney or the legal counsel. You've got the other executive leaders that you can imagine is in that board meeting, is in that Zoom call, and they're deciding, watch this, they're deciding if we give the court what they're demanding over the last year, then this is what it's going to cost us. But if we delay and we do this strategy and we do this, whatever their goals are, and in result, it's only going to cost us 183,000. It's going to be under 200,000. So it's better to go this way. Can you imagine having to leave that meeting and go, I guess they're used to it.
Yeah.
I guess this is par for the course for anything goes AG.
Yeah. I find this whole thing fascinating because of just the cultural aspect of the organization. I mean, you know this through your work. I believe that organizations have a DNA, right? They've got a personality. There's things that they attract. There's things that they permit. There's things that they don't permit. I mean, I see it in my work. And I was talking to Mike before the podcast. And for me, as I look back, and I haven't done enough research to really, put my foot down on this, but it seems to me that there's just something fundamentally wrong in the foundation of the Assemblies of God, going back to their beginning, because we're seeing this now more because of social media, because of all the outlets where people now have a chance to pick up their podcast or whatever and talk. But it seems to me like this is kind of a fundamental flaw in the organization. This is not the first time this has happened. What do you think about?
Are you talking about sexual cover-ups? Is that what you're talking about, Brian?
Sexual cover-ups in particular, but just in general, these kinds of scandals, I mean, Bracy, I have often mirrored your energy about, look, these people are saying they're one thing and they're acting like another. This is not a new phenomenon. I think this is baked in the cake.
Absolutely. In fact, when you go back to, and I wish I had been prepared for this one, when you go back to Alvin, Texas, and then Topeka, Kansas, and then they went out to California at the what's the revival? The
Azusa Street.
Azusa Street. Well, the main leader, you look it up, there are legal court cases in San Antonio, I think. I looked it up like 9 months ago, a year. He was sexually abusing people. And that's what we were born out of. And of course, things were happening before that. And that's documented, Mike. I mean, it's not something I just, thought up. And I mean, it opens up a can of worms where you go, well, what about before that?
Yeah. So organizationally, in terms of what we've seen with Chi Alpha, you talked a little bit about the district aspect of this. Do you have any comments to make about the national office's interaction with all of this? Let me prep you a little bit, because what we've seen is that the national office is basically saying, hey, you know what, it's not our job to police these districts. It's the district's job. You know, we're supposed to be hands off. We only enforce matters of doctrine and that kind of thing. And, you know, Mike and I have kind of called bullshit on that when it comes to abusing children sexually. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, I think there's been a tendency in the assemblies from the beginning that, we quote handle things ourselves, and I don't know how we came up with that. It might have been culturally, and the further back you go, there's so much, abuse in families and authority, and so when I look back and I know some stories. Everybody knows some stories. When you look back and um I was talking to my mom yesterday about somebody, and I said, "When did Dad know about that guy?" And she said, "Well, when he invited him to come speak at the church in the late 70s and early 80s, and he got them 2 rooms, and then they ended up in the same room together and moved in together, he knew." And, my dad was ostracized for calling people out and for reporting. And so he wasn't always on the in crowd. And what's interesting is some of those guys that were in and around or in leadership during those days, some of those guys are still around. And so, and then I had my interactions, and, I'm a Wilson. People may not say, I may not, let's just say, I probably shouldn't belong in politics and probably shouldn't belong in the pulpit. I may be too polarizing. And so I would say that some of the guys involved, I don't know, I have my opinions, but maybe I'm biased.
Yeah. Well, I talked to a former national youth director for the Assemblies of God, and he said to me, if I exposed what I knew, he goes, the whole thing would come down. He goes, there's so much corruption in that world, and we could just name names. I'm not going to name names right now, but I mean, you just go on and on with, and Bracy, you and I had this conversation, but one of the reasons I got out of that whole thing was I saw that. I didn't know details. Where the bodies are buried because you're a Wilson and you are in that world. And that's why I think I told you this when we released this podcast, you're going to get hit on that side. Those people are not going to like that you're talking, because where the bodies are buried. What's going on. And I got out of that whole thing because I was being groomed to be one of those national youth guys. I was told straight up, like, if you do this, 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 you will end up being the national youth director of the Assemblies of God, because I'm a good speaker and I'm smart and I know how to play the game. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And one of the reasons why I think you and I kind of connected that day, and I don't understand all of it, to be honest with you, but I think it was something like that. It was like we're cut from the same cloth. I'm a black sheep. I've been a black sheep
Are you
since I
talking
was a
about when
little
we
kid.
first met?
Yeah,
Yeah, and I
yeah,
don't think we mentioned that on the, how we met.
yeah. Go ahead. You want to unpack it? You can.
Well, I mean, I think you came to our service, and, I don't know how y'all feel about this, and I don't care how biblical it is. I don't care if you did it this weekend, but I don't know. The whole foot washing thing for me is, it happened then. I'm not so sure it should happen anymore, but whatever, but we were happened to doing foot washing that day. You humble yourself or you're serving one another. It's just symbolism, right? But in spite and beyond the symbolism of it, I was about 17. I came in the back. It was like a retreat. It wasn't a main service. It was like a Saturday morning. It was March of 1996. So it's probably spring break. And so we're there. And I came in, I was kind of depressed, just probably teenager depression. And Mike came over and I saw him coming. And when he came, the Spirit of God just came in that moment. I just felt it. It welled up. I just felt it all over me. It felt very strong, like a heavy blanket. And I still align with that. Some people may say you're deconstructed, or, you don't believe this, or you don't have the right, thinking, or you haven't checked the boxes. I don't know. I feel God's presence, and I feel like I'm one with it, and I've never been separate from it. And so that same presence that I feel, that I can't live without. That presence I can't live with. That's the presence I felt at that moment. It's the same presence now as it was then. And so I'm on the just experience this, and Mike prays for me, and he says, "You're like an arrow that's been pulled back in a bow that God's preparing." And I have to be honest with you. I look back at that. I feel like the father who came to Jesus with his sick child, and Jesus said, "Do you believe?" The guy said, "Well, help me with my unbelief." And so I believe, but I still don't see from the perspective that I have had then. I still feel like I'm in the bow, if that makes sense. And I've come to the place where maybe that's where I'm at, and that's okay. And maybe this podcast is a one-off, and that's okay. Maybe I sound like everybody else, and that's part of the story and part of the conversation. I'm willing to be used in any way. And if this can help anybody, great. But I will tell you, that day, Mike, when I met you, it was a feeling of authenticity, a feeling of you cared. And that's really what's hard to find today. People that give a shit.
Yeah.
People that really
That's
care. And that
actually on my next book. I give a shit.
I give a shit. And actually, when I'm hiring people, what's that?
I said, I'm just kidding, by the way. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, when I'm hiring people, that's kind of one of the main temperature gauges I'm looking for. Most people can do the job. The question is, do you care a little bit more than everybody else? Because that's what makes the difference.
Right. Right. Right.
Well, from
Yeah.
my perspective, that day, I knew you were special. You just get around you, and you just know you have this is something about you. Uh, but I felt like I knew your brothers, and I knew how, we don't want to get into all that, but basically, I knew how powerful they were as in that world, in that system. And you were just different. You were just, and I felt like God was going, I don't want you to be because because Bracy, you could be released into that world and be real powerful because of your giftings and because of who your family is. But I just always, that was strong on me that day was stay in the bow, stay in the bow. Don't go prematurely. Don't rush it. Don't let yourself out of the bow. And I don't know. I didn't know what it meant. I went on, obviously I just said what I thought I was supposed to say. And
Well,
then,
that's interesting because I I I I never felt like I always felt like I was really forcing everything I did
right.
in the ministry. It felt
Yeah.
really forced. And in 2012, a number of years after I got out of the ministry, I was on the phone with my dad, and I said to my dad, I said, "Dad, I just feel like a fraud." And he said, "Well, what have you done wrong?" And I said, "I haven't done anything wrong. I just don't feel that I'm fitting within that. Like it's just not happening and working." And I remember, I had started a church. I'd been in for 4 years. I mean, we were in a building. We had a public charter school. Everything wasn't going great. We had 175, 200 people. It was 2009. So it was like 9 months into the recession. The building was challenging, but we had a lot of things going for us. And I had a dream in January of 2009, and I didn't share this with the church, but I wrote it in my journal, and it was, I dreamed I was the on the stage, and I had my hands lifted, and it was during that transition from worship to prayer, and you're praying for people, and you're going into, to the sermon. And I'm in the middle of that dream, and all of a sudden, two big angels, I knew they were angels. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were angels, and they were wearing black. They weren't bad. They were, to me, they were good, but they came and they grabbed me by the shoulders so powerfully, they dragged me by my feet off the back of the stage through the back curtain. In fact, I remember that the drummer he's drumming, and he's kind of looking at me, And he's got this look on his face like, "Where are you going?" And I woke up and I went downstairs and I wrote it all down and I said, "God, I feel like you're telling me that I won't leave the ministry, so you're gonna drag me out of it." And that's the way I left ministry. Not only did I wanna give to my son who's on the spectrum of autism, he's 22 years old today, but I left that. And I had a pastor friend call me, and he might as well told me that I was the prodigal son, that I'd squandered what reputation, what legacy, you come from good stock, that shit line, your grandfather this, your dad this, you had a school. And he literally told me over the phone that I squandered it. I mean, there was leaving no room, no grace. I mean, that was it. That was the phone call. And what's interesting, he's one of the pastors involved in the Daniel Savala thing today.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that means. I'm not trying to draw conclusions. I'm just saying,
We will.
okay, you can draw it. But, I look back and I'm like, this is where it is that it came down to this. If I look back and you say, well, what did you learn from all of that? And what was I saying? I don't know. I'm just saying a lot of things.
Go ahead. You're good.
Is what I learned is that my body could not do anymore. I needed to realize that I was a human being and that I'm a human being first. And we've been so involved in human doing that we've lost ourselves and we're stuck in our freaking bubble world of church. And we wonder why people are looking at us like we're weird, because we are. In my opinion, we look weird. We sound weird. People are looking at us like Erica, Kirk and Kenneth Copeland eyes. That's the way it feels. It just feels off. And you say, what should we do? Maybe less doing, maybe less talking. And you say, what does that look like? I'm not going to try to figure it out for you. You figure it out. You'll know what to do, but you probably need to shut up more. And so really, I think our doingness will feel better to the people we're trying to love and accept when it comes from a more quality being. But we're so caught up in the doingness that we forgot about the human nature, that we're not just supernatural, we're not just super spiritual, but we're also supernatural. We're human beings. And I think when we come back to that beingness, we'll also feel the belonging and the belonging in the community. But we're not loving others as we love ourselves because we're not loving ourselves. We're not taking care. We're not realizing we are freaking the temple of the Holy Spirit. And I could keep going. I mean, I could keep going.
Well, one of the things that Bracy, you and I talked about too, was that bubble. The reason why, in my opinion, when people look at the church from the outside, because I'm outside, Brian's outside, you're outside, but we were all inside at one point. So we do know where the bodies are buried. We do know some of the details. And so when I talk to people who've never been on the inside, but they like my brother, who never was a church guy, but says some of the same things that I'm saying now. It looks phony to me. It looks like they're just, they're covering up stuff. They're not really honest. Yeah, I know they're not. It's not a guess. It's not guessing for me or Brian or you. It seems like we're not guessing. We know they're lying. I know Jeannie Mayo is a liar. Allegedly a liar, but not allegedly. She's a liar. I've been in the room and she lies, and that world accepts her. They accept those lies. They accept that. And there's so many reasons why this is all coming to a head now. Social media, there's more access to truth, all that, but it's being exposed. And I asked you when you and I first started talking about this last week, a couple weeks ago, I asked you, I said, Bracy, how does it feel to be vindicated in some ways? Like, how does it feel to know this? Like 30 years ago, you knew something was wrong, and now you really know, and now it's in NBC is exposing it, and there's more to come. There's more to come. So I'm going to ask you now, how do you feel about that? And with the fact that you still have brothers and people that you love that are in it still. So I know you have to dance, you have to be careful, but what how do you feel?
I feel grieved. I feel really pissed. I feel like there's verses I think of that I just go, you guys are not, you're not looking at it right. You are definitely playing the card you want to play. And it just doesn't make sense. For example, you know, but they're using Matthew 18, we got to, and forgive me, I haven't looked it up before. I wasn't prepared for this thing. I'm just
You're good.
talking based
You're
out
good.
of my heart. Well, you got to go to your brother and you got to make it right. And, but also in the same chapter, it says, Jesus says, I'm going to, for somebody that hurts a child, a millstone should be tied around their neck and thrown into the nearest lake. And so they want to say, don't touch the Lord's anointed. But that word, woe unto you that hurts a child. That word, woe, if you look it up in the go F yourself Greek, I'm sorry. If you look it up, you'll see that it says that the woe is these grieved, and it's a denunciation. And so my answer to those that say, oh, well, you need to handle it like this. And I think everybody tried to handle it like that. Okay. Yeah. And so now we're at the millstone. And so my response is, woe unto you. You should be grieved, and everyone should be denouncing this. And so, part of what I like about, these therapy sessions where we're dropping, the S bomb and the F bomb every now and then, it is because I think some of that needs to be turned over a little bit. That I think it needs, the tables need to be turned over a little bit. That we're so caught up in the words and the things instead of the substance. It's like what Bill Wilson from New York said back in the 80s. I remember at J. Don George's church in Calvary Church, what is it? Calvary Temple, Irving, Texas. And I remember Bill Wilson saying, he used the word damn in an evening service. He says, and you don't give a damn. And you could just hear the like that. And he says, and you guys care more about me using the word damn than those kids on the street in New York. And he's being funny, but he's stirring it up a little bit. And he's saying, you guys are so caught up in the wrong things.
Yeah.
You've missed it, and you stink.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
that's
Preaching to the choir
probably
with
why
us.
I got out, because I was smelling myself a little too much.
right. Right.
So it wasn't about everybody else. It was about, yeah, I probably need to get out. And I did a master's commission. I asked my wife this morning, I said, can you remember anything that we did that was really abusive? Or, because, we kind of had the SEAL team. We had money. We had a nice church. We're in Plano, Texas. Everybody had a home opener. I mean, they had their own room, their own bathroom. I mean, they had food. We fed them every day at lunch, like a full meal. I mean, they were really blessed. We paid them for almost all the work they did. Any kind of volunteer work, we paid them. So we did a lot of cool things, but I do think that some of the rituals that we inherited by learning from some of the people we're talking about probably kind of beat down and was very cult-like. And so I grew up in that. And you say, well, you're saying it was cult-like. I don't know. Maybe some of it was. Maybe some of this generational stuff we need to relook at and turn it over and say, maybe we should do some things differently.
Yeah. When I just want to circle back to a couple things you said, talking about being versus doing, and all the way back to the business of church. I mean, as my wife and I have grown, if you look at the last podcast we watched, I mean, it's really about your spirituality, right? It's really about your spiritual practice. And I think that maybe part of the way, I think you give a pretty good description about how the church has become more of a Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme than a true organ of society that can deliver some good, right? And I loved what you said about being. I also am a little shocked that you ran an MC program and they actually fed those kids. I mean, kudos to you. It's interesting to me because I think about the whole Chi Alpha scandal, and I think about this culture. We're really talking about culture here. I don't think any of those people set out to abuse children. I mean, they didn't get out of high school and say, okay, I'm going to go become a pastor so I can abuse children. Some of them maybe. I mean, I know there was one pastor who took 2 of his kids there. Maybe he had some issues that never got dealt with. I guess that's my point. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this from your perspective of how good people inside that bubble become organs of that culture, and they do things that maybe somebody who knew them 10, 15, 20 years ago would never imagine them doing.
That's a good
How,
question.
how does that happen from your perspective?
And then, of course, there's seemingly 2 types of people involved in these situations. If we were going to generalize it, it would be those in the know and those that don't know. And sometimes those that don't know find out at some point, and they have to make a decision. What am I going to do? Am I going to risk my reputation? Am I going to risk my livelihood? What am I going to do next? If I do this, will I be accepted anywhere else? And frankly, because they remember what it took to get where they are right now. All of our guys that come into ministry don't come from ministry families. They came because they were an 18-year-old or 17-year-old at a camp and felt the Holy Ghost lead them to the altar. And they said, I want to be a youth pastor. And then they go back to church on that weekend. And then they say, I'm going to be a youth pastor. And everybody says, you're going to be a youth pastor. Guess what? He's going to be a youth pastor. And you say, is that bad? I'm not saying it's bad. It's a recruiting tool. And then some have been, you got to say, I can't say none of them were called to the ministry if you want to use that. But I think what happens is you get in this routine and ritual of doing in life. And this is the bubble you're in. And this is the conversations you're having. And these are the influences that you have. And when you're in a rut, it's really hard to walk out of the rut. You have to step out of the rut. And that's what a rut is, right? I think that when you're in the rut of these are the only people you talk to, these are the only people you interact with, you toe the line, you go along to get along. And frankly, that's kind of a lot of the leadership I know,
Yeah. So another question off of that, if I could, you are a business leader. You run your own enterprise. That requires leadership. I hear that word a lot in church. I don't see it a lot, but I hear the word. I don't see real leadership. From your position, could you contrast what you think in your life, what real leadership looks like?
Wow. I've listened to hundreds of John Maxwell tapes. I've read all the books. In fact, the church I was in Plano, he was one of the renowned biblical leadership teachers. I always wanted to, this is kind of off the top subject, but not, I always wanted to do a teaching or write a book from all of John Maxwell's teachings and say, I wanted to write a book that said the top 10 number one things you need to know. Did you catch that? The top 10 number one things you need to know. He's always saying the number one thing you need to know. Every day you need to do this. And I'm like, if I did everything you told me to do every day,
We'd have a life.
right. And so you're asking me a question about what leadership is. I think leadership is, we need to stop making leadership into something it's not. And leadership is so much more about the beingness in that moment rather than a list of things you have to do or a list of things you know to do. I got to remember their name. I got to say this. I got to say this at the right time. I got to send this follow-up. I got to, this is the action I need to take. This is the line I need to say. This is the principle the 21 irrefutable laws. If I do all of these, then I'm a leader. And I think it's, especially today, it's got to be much more simple than that. I'll tie it to this line and then come back to it, is that the only place you'll ever find the Holy Spirit is now. It's right here in this moment. not in the future, not in the present, not in the past. It's right here. And so not only is the Holy Spirit present in and around us, but we are one with it. That's my belief. We're one with the Holy Spirit. It's not something I procure, because if it was, it would be something I could lose. That's just my belief. And so if I'm one with that, leadership is about finding the right thing to do and then doing it again. And that right thing to do may be different. And that right thing to do may be different by who I'm talking to. And that I remember a pastor that said something about worship. He was trying to get his worship leader to be more expressive, because he was very introverted but very talented. And he was trying to get him to be more expressive, to lead. And he asked this question in front of a Master's Commission group. He said, where in scripture does it say that, he was trying to make a point that worship is always expressive, that worship is always outward. And this is worship. And he was trying to make that point. And I said, well, what about Hannah when she prayed the quiet prayer? And I think that in leadership, we're trying to make it's like we try to make it like the education system, and we just shove all the kids in there. And really, I think we're in a different day. And this is what he said at that meeting. He said, don't teach the exception, teach the rule. And I think people are so sick of that approach that they need the exception of love for where they are right then in that moment, not this list that I learned at a conference, and this is the way a leader looks. And so I think it's about leadership is about being in this moment, and how does that come out? And it's going to come out in so many different ways.
And that Jesus taught the exception, not the rule. I mean, I'd like to do a study on that. You know what I mean? Like, his life was the exception, not the
Yes.
rule. So that guy
And
can
he
go.
broke so many rules.
Yeah.
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 Every day he was breaking rules. That's why he was so polarizing to those
Right.
bastards,
Right.
those whitewashed tombs. I think
Right.
I think Jesus dropped the bomb every now and then. When he went into the temple, I think he was throwing some tables and some other things. Just my opinion
Yeah.
from this pastor's kid.
I think I could align with that opinion. So
I'm with you.
yeah. So where do you see? I'm just curious. I mean, I think all three of us would agree that if it were authentic, and I joke with Mike about this a lot of times. I remember shortly before we left our last church, they did a series on how to be authentic. I thought, well, that says it all right there, right? Let's just lock the doors and walk away if you got to teach people a series on how to be authentic. Way to go, Gary, if you're watching this. But anyway,
He is.
where do you where do you see this all going? I mean, where I was started, I guess, was that we believe that an authentic expression of spirituality that is Christ based, that is Jesus centered, is a good thing and can be something that is helpful and advantageous to people. I think we all believe that. And then over here we have this church culture that exists that in many, at least of the big things we're talking about, seems to have lost the plot. Where do you see this thing going? And you can talk specifically about where you see it going with the Chi Alpha thing, or just where you see it going culturally, socially. I'm intrigued about how you think about that.
I think that I know what I want to say. I'm just working it through and sitting with it for a moment. I think the Daniel Savala thing in 2017, when the Me Too movement exploded, I turned to my wife and I said, the church is next. And I just felt like there was going to be a big exposure. Like Eddie Long, I say the name Eddie Long to people, and there's people that don't know Eddie Long. And I'm like, well, TD Jakes, Eddie Long, same thing. Atlanta, he was abusing boys. He was one of the first ones that really came out and hit. And then TD Jakes and you see these other big names coming out, even local here in Frisco. One of my brothers, one of my very dear friends, one of the, he's on, he's been on the Outreach Magazine Top 100 a couple of times. So I think that there's a lot of exposure, not just happening in the church, but I think it's happening in the world. There's so many things changing and changing so fast. I think people are dealing with a nihilism and meaninglessness. And that's where Solomon comes in. He was like, everything's freaking meaningless. I think that really resounds with people. But in my opinion, but if you just turn around to somebody like me and go, the world's meaningless, but here's Jesus, let me pray with you. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Stop. Don't do that. You say, well, what is the solution? You know, that's where you may just need to shut up for a while. Maybe you just need to be quiet and quit looking for a solution and just be. And you know what's amazing is when you're being, stuff comes to you. It's like, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. People are going to come your way, and you're going to be in such a way that you may not even, I'm so tired of hearing, I've heard so many people say it, but it's true. You're not even going to say Jesus. It's going to be presence, and people are going to sense it. And it doesn't even make sense to the church today. What I'm saying is weird to the church. It's woo-woo. It's new age. But I'm telling you, we're headed towards a time where people are tired of this structure and they're looking for community. And that word, it's the C word, the community. We've used it so many times. It's like the G word, the God word. We've used it. It's been just burned so many times. But I really feel that affordable housing, and you go, whoa, left field. Affordable housing and affordability is going to drive communities. And I'm really looking for opportunities for a couple of acres, and you're building small communities. Maybe they come under a nonprofit. Maybe there's some self-sustaining businesses on that property, whether it's a haircut, whether it's, small little businesses in storage there. Maybe it's a metal container that has vegetables in it that is hydroponics, and you're selling it out of that, and your people are renting these modular buildings. And I know that sounds like way left field, but I feel like that's where we're going. And we're still trying to build these huge, I remember when Gateway Church, Robert Morris wanted to build, the next big thing. And they sat down with the architect. You know what they told the architect? They said this: have you seen Fort God Prestonwood Baptist Church in Plano? We want it bigger than that. That's what Gateway said. Okay. And then they built that. Okay. That whole thing, they got to figure out what to do next with. Okay. So that, obviously, that day is over. And you say, well, are we going to home groups? I am so tired of trying to fit it into a box. I don't know. How about let people show us where to go, instead of us leading them and beating them where to go.
Right. But that's the thing, is that's why that is a woo-woo in the church, because you can't control that. Right. Is it, what Brian and I talk about this all the time, about how basically church needs to tell you how to do it. We're not teaching people how to hear from God. What you're basically saying, Bracy, is that we have our own agency, we have our own connection to God, that we need to trust it, and we need to develop it and develop an ear to hear God ourselves. We don't need a pastor telling us what to do. Well, that's a real threat to that bubble, because they get their livelihood that way. They get their their power that way. They get their influence that way. So you're basically, you're sounding like a crazy man right now to them, because they
I got a
can't
crazy
control it.
one for you. The number one thing that somebody's going to say that is in the community, in the circle that I'm from, after this podcast, if they listen to this far, is they're
They're
going to go,
listening, bro.
he's
I'm telling you
unbiblical
right now.
there. He's unbiblical there. I don't even, he this and that. And you know what? I go, okay, if you're going to do that, if you're going to hold so tightly to that thought, which sounds so righteous and so pure, then why don't you do a deep dive on tithing? Because you guys have never taught it right. There are percentages that are way beyond 10%. And there are multiple groups that never paid tithe. And they paid tithe in a certain way. And it's for certain people. And it actually included the poor. So I don't want to hear one freaking line from you until you preach tithing on a Sunday morning like that.
Yeah. Right.
And until you have, don't talk to me.
Okay, so but I'm going to say this, and we've said this, Brian and I say this all the time. If any of you that are watching this, and you have a problem with what Bracy has said or what we've said, you are invited to come on this podcast, and we won't edit it. We'll debate it. We'll bring you back on. And the reason I'm saying that, Bracy, is because Brian and I have challenged directly people, like directly, and said to them, if you have a problem with what we're saying, the content of what we're saying, then you come on and you share in your Bible, get your little Bible out and talk to us about it and we'll debate you on it. If you don't, shut the fuck up. We don't want to hear it. So you go on your little, your Facebook page and you just say, Mike Donahue said fuck, whatever. You can do whatever you want. But if you want to debate the actual facts, come on the podcast and we'll do that. But they won't do it. They won't,
Right.
Bracy. They're not going to do that. They're going to get in their little circles and they're going to badmouth you. They're going to say, see, here's the evidence. And they were never your friend, by the way. They were never your friend.
They weren't.
They were
My
never your
friend. I
friend.
love them. I have a list of people that I grew up with that I love, that I love, that I love. But I really think they were friends with my family.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's okay.
And I'll just make one. Yeah. And that's, I mean, we could spend an hour talking about that if we wanted to talk about authenticity, and Mike and I have talked a lot about that on the podcast. And the thing I'll say with people who want to bring Bible verses, it's like, look, you know what? If you got some half-ass mail order degree from Waxahachie, Texas, or you went to a liberal arts college, or, if, you're just Pollyanning what someone said to you, come prepared. Because you know what? I mean, I didn't go to Bible college. I've read a lot of theology books. I don't understand the Bible. I understand it enough to know that I don't understand it. And that those black and white words on the pages that were written over the course of time by men, by the way, who had an agenda, you got to be careful before you throw those things around. So, you want to bring that heat, go ahead, but just be ready. Have your shit together. One thing I just want to circle back to again, and I loved what you said it. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I just failed in this point, by the way. I just want everybody out there in podcast land to know that I just failed in this point. But when you're talking about leadership and love, I mean, it really comes down to caring about the person, right? So if I offended you in your Berean degree, I'm sorry. I lost my cool there. But it really comes down to caring about the person. That's what you were just talking about, being your friend. When you're truly being a friend, you care about the person. And one of the things we try to do is talk to everyone who listens to this podcast. That's a good test when you go to church. Do you feel like they really care about you as a person, no matter what? On your good days, on your bad days, on your up days, on your down days, if you come in and you say, the 7 dirty words or whatever, do they care about you as a person? I think I heard you guys talking about that a minute ago. And I think that's just a powerful metric that we all can hold.
Well, I can just tell you right now from Brace's world, because I know a little bit about it, that when he started saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Bracy, but when you started telling the truth and saying things that were outside the bubble, you lost friends, right? You lost people who, because you are like I'm just gonna say this, and maybe I'll edit this out, but I've met your brothers. You have more charisma than both of them put together, and you could have taken what the gifts God's given you and been a superstar in that bubble. Like you could have been a superstar in that bubble because of just because your giftings and who you are and your intelligence and all of that. And I think you could have dwarfed your brothers, to be honest. But you chose not to do that. You got out of the rut. You said some things that weren't right in their bubble, in that world. But you were true to yourself, and huge threat. But you lost friends on that. But I told you last night when we were talking on the phone that they were never your friend. They weren't. They saw you as a ministry friend. And a ministry friend is not the same thing as a real friend, because when your son got diagnosed and it was odd for them and it was hard to handle because it was different. Where were they? They disappeared. Where the hell did they go? And that I think probably hit you as a dad and as a human more than anything. And I don't want to put you on the spot. You can say whatever you want on that, but just a little I've gotten to know from our conversations the last couple of weeks, that disappoints me for the church, because you're a great guy. You're a great guy. And you could have used some brothers. I don't mean your biological brothers, but you could have used some Christian brothers who stayed in the game with you, got dirty with you, walked you through that stuff, stayed in the game, but they didn't. They bailed when it got hard for them. So screw them.
And you know what? Yeah, I mean, there's some truth in that. And not that there's untruth in that.
I know
And
there's nuance. I know there's
yeah, there's
layers.
no what I was gonna say is that, and I could say a lot of good things about my brothers, and I could say a lot of good things about, and I know what you're saying, and I could say those things, but I think another point is when you live in the surrenderedness, the forced surrender of life, when life happens to you and brings you to your knees through trauma and crisis, not always of something you did or invited, that'll change you. And I think that there are sometimes, I call it the trauma club, where before 2021, I I have had no idea what it really meant to experience trauma. And my son, who was diagnosed, and we may not even be able to get into it, but that's kind of what you were referring to. My son was diagnosed with autism when he was 3, because that's the earliest you can do it, but he was nonverbal for a while. At some point, I said to my therapist, I said, "I just want to hear my son say I love you," and he did, and he was able to talk, and he became high functioning. And at 18, he was driving our Mercedes out in the middle of a parking lot and driving the car in the neighborhood, and he had almost nearly 4,000 subscribers on YouTube with over 1,000 videos. Guy did like hours of live streaming at a time. Just a real brilliant in his own mind guy. And in 2021, I don't know if it's COVID. I don't know if maybe he got into an age where different type of diagnoses may have impacted him, bipolar or something. I don't know. That is on the spectrum of autism, bipolar, ADHD, schizophrenia, Asperger's. Rain Man, Tom Cruise, Dustin Hoffman, he had Asperger's. Doesn't always look like that. It's different. But my son in 2021, pretty typical him. And then all of a sudden on the 24th of September, he falls in the closet after a homecoming football game, my daughter's school we went to, and he gets home and he falls in the closet. And he's holding his head and he's just excruciating. And I'm thinking, okay, he has a headache, right? Within 3 days, he was gone. And when I mean gone, it's hard to describe the kinds of sounds, the lack of coherence, the yelling, the screaming. He took everything off the walls. He emptied the kitchen onto the floor, emptied the refrigerator onto the floor, opened things through it. We had some physical things happen with my wife and I between him. We had never experienced this before. He had never been on medicine before. And you live that and you say, we could have done this or done that, but we did for whatever reason. We were in shock. We were in confusion. We were in questioning, trying to figure out, trying to save him. But 6 months of psychosis. And that's a whole nother episode, but that happened a couple of times and some other challenging things happen. And hi, Bryce. My son just walked in. And so, what verse comes to my mind, if you're going to, for those of you that need a verse, is Jesus learned obedience through suffering. And that's rarely taught. And most people don't even know that's a verse. But even Jesus had to learn obedience through suffering. I really don't understand that based on the perspective of how we were taught about who he was as the Son of God, that he would experience suffering. But I said to somebody one time about this about a year ago, I was in tears and I was just like pouring my heart out over the details of this. And I said to them, it's unfortunate that I had to turn to Buddha to learn about suffering. And everything I learned about how to surrender to suffering, I learned from Buddha. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's just the way the universe and the way this creator God wanted to teach me. And I guess if he can use a donkey, then he can use someone, some fat ass on, the restaurant lobby table. I don't know. But the thing about surrender is that you can resist it for so long, but it begins to impact every part of you. And you move into you know, fight and flight and fear. What is that? Is that the sympathetic and the parasympathetic? And there's that rest state. And it's Hebrews chapter 4 that God has prepared us for a place of rest. Enter into that rest, and that we are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit's in us. And there's a rest for us, and we're not living in rest, and we're not leading in rest. We're leading in fear and putting people in fear by the way we're leading, by the way we're talking, and the experience that they're having when they're with us. And it's not restful. And so that's what's really, we need that type of experience in our spirit, in our health, and our mind. And we really have a mental crisis. And it's because our nervous system as a mass, whether it be COVID or whether it be AI, whether it be the changes around the world, but we are a freaking nervous wreck. And really, the thing that changed my life was meditation.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know I'm opening up a lot of can of worms there, but I'm just saying that
Not
I
for
had an
us. Not for us.
experience with
We're
Holy
good.
Spirit.
Yeah.
That was the change in me.
Yeah. Brian, we got to have him back.
Talk a lot about that. We gotta have it back. I want to leave y'all with a quote out there, though, if you're a little triggered by Bracy's reference to Buddha. Richard Rohr I think he's a Franciscan. He runs a center of action and contemplation in New Mexico. I believe it's Richard Rohr, and my wife will correct me if it's not, says that, if it's true one place, it's true everywhere. So I'll just leave you with that, and I will endorse, Bracy, everything you said. So
Have you heard Richard Rohr talk about Yahweh?
no, I haven't.
Oh, man. And he just talks about Yahweh is really not a word, it's a breath.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. And I think a lot of people know that, but he's a perfect example that the presence of God is so freaking strong with him. And yet most Assemblies of God, people on our side, and I know we're wrapping this up and I keep opening it back up, but that's the presence of God. That's the presence of the Creator. Everything changes, but that yarn that from the beginning, before the beginning of time, the presence of God has always been there. It's the constant. And you can put all sorts of adjectives on it, but it's the only thing that's true, and you can't really describe it. And that's the itness that we've lost.
Yeah. And you can't control it. And when you try to, it's called religion. And Jesus had some pretty strong responses to religion. And so that's not changing. So, Bracy, I mean, this has been, I think Brian and I both are like, wow, we should have done this a long time ago. You're like a brother. I mean, you don't know, but we embrace pretty much everything you said. And we've been talking about it for a long time. So, I love you, man. And I this is not the last time you'll be on this podcast. And so, but I also want you to know that we got your back, because you are going to get hit. I know who your family is. I know who you're connected with, and we got you back. And so all I'm saying to you, though, if you're going to go at him, go at him front. Don't go behind and get his, and be a coward and gossip. It's in the Bible, by the way, you Bible thumpers. You're not supposed to gossip or slander. So if you got something to say to him, say it to his face. Don't say it to your little buddies in your bubble. So I'll just say that. And if you do, I'll call you out. And if I find out, I will call you out. I'll call you out by freaking name. I don't care who you are. So thank you.
What is the old statement? I get out, but they keep sucking me right back in.
Yeah, well, that day's over. Hey, man, thank you so much, Bracy. And man, thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty. And Brian, why don't you wrap it up?
Again, thanks. This has been fantastic. For those of you who stuck around for the whole thing, you really got some gems. We appreciate you coming on and your transparency and your passion. And we will see you all next week.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care, guys. Have a good week. Stay warm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.